Hi, everybody. Welcome to Ortho Forward, the dental monitoring podcast focus on cutting edge technology in dentistry and especially in orthodontics. So tonight I'm co-hosting with Serge Dahan, orthodontist from south of France, and
Hi guys.
our host today is Ophir Ten, CEO and founder of Pearl AI, a cutting edge technology dedicated to bring some AI intelligence, enhancing the capacity of doctors in surfacing problems or issues in X-rays. Please, Ophir, introduce yourself and welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm Ophir Tans, the founder and CEO of Pearl.
When did you start Pearl AI, Ophir?
Well, so Pearl is actually a spin out of my previous company. So I started another AI and computer-driven organization called GumGum back in 2008 and grew that to, well over $1 billion in value, and actually started to incubate the concept of applying that technology to dentistry in late 2015. And initially it was kind of like a research project. And over time we started to we began to take it more seriously and really analyze the business cases and medical need for the technology. And in May of 2019, formally spun the company out of the previous company, and it then became named Pearl. So depending on how you look at it, either late 2015 from an R&D perspective, and formally in May of 2019.
I understand the inception of the AI, your AI love through GumGum. It makes total sense. But why dentistry? Because look, you could have applied your knowledge through GumGum to many other fields.
Yeah. So we did. We applied it to a few different fields, and those companies were spun out as well. But personally, I felt that the advent of AI around 2010 or so, the capabilities became very good, and I felt that there were a lot of problems in the world that could be solved with this technology and processes that could be improved by virtue of the use of the technology. And I became very interested personally in applying this to some form of medicine. I wanted to do something that I felt would be more sort of meaningful and helpful to humanity in general. So
Why?
we
GumGum was helping a different field of
It was a
humanity, I
lot of
would
like
say.
data and advertising, and it didn't feel like the ultimate calling, even though it's a tremendous company. I just felt like there was more to do that was, more important on some level. Um, so it was really my personal pet project, and I did look at a variety of forms of medicine. With dentistry, more radiography is captured um, on a day-to-day basis than any other field of medicine. And for a whole host of other reasons, there's just a lot less friction in dentistry to apply this technology widely into great effect. Also, my father is a retired dentist, so I really grew up in in that environment and felt familiar with it. And it felt like a perfect place to sort of apply this technology and
Should
hopefully,
you should have started with that. It's basically your father. Come on,
maybe.
AI. Your father say, "Hey, come on, you work in AI. You don't work in my field."
Yeah, have some data issues. I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I really do believe that if you look at it from an analytical perspective, dentistry is incredibly well suited for AI, partially because you're also not displacing anyone. So in other forms of medicine, you have a lot of concern from radiologists around, oh my God, is this going to do what I do better than I can? And honestly, in many
Mm.
cases, that is the case increasingly. So that this is a real challenge um, in those groups. Whereas in dentistry, you know, diagnosis is just one part of many, many things that a dentist is responsible for doing. So it's really also not threatening in the same kind of a way. And then from a distribution perspective, you're not kind of selling into these large hospital groups. You're more so dealing with a very entrepreneurial industry and a set of individuals. And again, just the sheer quantity of data available for training, but also data available to apply this to on a day-to-day basis to have a positive impact on patient health is tremendous.
So
But
let's
yeah,
take
maybe it's just because of my dad.
Yeah. Look, there is the 40-minute answer and the 2-second
Yeah,
answer. You're
exactly.
done.
There's a therapy answer and there's a
So
So just
to
look,
resume, you decided to change the world and helping dentists treating teeth.
yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's
Yeah,
helping elevate the standard of care for billions of patients. You
yeah,
know,
because
globally.
everyone has dental issues everywhere. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Everybody goes to the dentist. They do so fairly consistently. And if you look at the actual reality of diagnosis as it relates to, X-ray review in dentistry, it's pretty dismal. I mean, this isn't only Pearl's research. This is any research that you find on the topic. If you ask a set of practitioners to diagnose and treatment plan for a particular patient, and you ask 5 doctors to do that, you're going to get very different diagnoses, very different treatment plans. We ran a study where we asked 136 practitioners to diagnose and treatment plan a single patient's FMX. We saw treatment plans come in between $0 and $36,000 for the same patient. And the concurrence for decay, for example, on various teeth was like a coin flip on many of those teeth. It was 50-50. So there's clearly a challenge there, and it's kind of intuitive to understand why. Pathology is often small, it's hard to identify, it's easy to miss, and it can easily be misconstrued for something else. So you have something like decay versus, cervical burnout. And, people are going to have different reads on what's actually happening in that scenario. So AI is not intended to replace or supersede the diagnosis performed by a practitioner, but it's intended to point out areas of interest, provided with a second set of eyes, and kind of work in conjunction with the dentist to come up with the best possible diagnosis, which is why it's called, second opinion and not first opinion.
you were saying it's intuitive. The idea is intuitive. But so at the inception of Pearl, it was very intuitive idea. How Pearl is today, how compared to what it was in 2019, if we don't take your gum experience.
Yeah. Honestly, it's embarrassingly similar. Like, not very little has changed. So we basically have a very
Don't say that for a startup. Look, if you say that a startup in like 4 years, it's embarrassingly the same. Like, my God, like my investor will kill me.
In terms of our mission and the thesis of the company, like, really hasn't changed at all. Like, we're trying to do something very simple, which is we want to empower dentists and elevate the standard of care for patients across every dental practice globally. So that was the idea since the beginning of the company. And what's changed between now and then is we've built a lot of the technology, we've gotten the regulatory clearances, we've put the commercial and distribution mechanisms in place. So now it's really happening in increasing velocity. But the core thesis and the core mission is really identical to what it was.
Okay, so you keep your track.
Yeah,
Serge.
keep your track. What challenges did you face as an entrepreneur in the dental industry? And if you face challenges, how did you overcome them?
I mean, look,
especially compared to Gum. I would precise Serge's question, especially compared to your Gum experience, which is very different.
Yeah, dentistry world is quite different, and entrepreneurship in dentistry world must be different, I think. Yeah.
I would say that from an entrepreneurial and business building perspective, it's very similar. Like, the reality, as Philippe knows, I'm sure really well, because every entrepreneur knows, it's just miserably grueling at times and really hard. So the feelings that I had at some points in building Pearl were very similar to the feelings I had when I was like 25 building Gum in terms of like, shit, this is hard. Is it going to work? There's all types of doubt and challenges along the way. The nature of the challenges are totally different. We're in a totally different industry with different requirements. Part of what makes Pearl challenging is that we're dealing with the medical space, and that requires you to be able to sort of operate at a level of proficiency and accuracy that is an incredibly high bar. Whereas if you got something wrong sort of at Gum and, let's say we were looking at a vehicle in an image and we thought it was, a Pontiac versus a Mustang. That's not something that people wanted us to do, and that was a bad thing, but it wasn't the end of the world because we were going to look at another billion images that day and generally had to be directionally right with that. Whereas here, you need to achieve certain thresholds of efficacy that are much, much higher than what you might see in a research environment. You need to apply it to different populations, to different geographies, to different sensor types. And then, of course, you have regulatory agencies. So we have, of course, in America, the FDA. We had to run incredibly rigorous clinical trials that were very complicated, that cost millions of dollars, that took several years to actually get cleared across, 10 different conditions. And that's just a really difficult thing to sort of go through. And then we had to replicate that globally. So we're now cleared in over 100 countries. And, different countries have different levels of rigor as it relates to the regulatory requirement. But a lot of our time was really spent in a very heavy R&D and statistical and regulatory mode. So we had to build the capabilities, refine them endlessly, and get the clearances. And only then could we really start commercializing. So that's very unique in dentistry, because in other fields that are not managed from a regulatory perspective in the same way, you can kind of just get out to market and sort of learn much more dynamically.
Yeah. And in this path, is there anything that you would have done differently or that you would do differently today?
It's funny that you asked that, because I do think about that often. I just think it's an interesting question. And I think purely technically, from a scientific perspective, we know so much more now than we knew then. I wish I knew now what I knew then, because just as it relates to labeling in particular. So labeling is when you take a set of imagery or radiography in this case, and you painstakingly have doctors go and sort of identify pathology, but they're either going to circle it, or they're going to draw in the lines, or they're going to put a box around it, and they're going to there's all types of nuances with how you go about doing that in particular. And that, it turns out, has a really profound impact on the actual results that you get on the other end. So technically, we sort of learned through a lot of experimentation and trial and error and working with other researchers and keeping up with the state of the art, what the optimal way to solve these problems actually is. And had we known that back in, 2019, that would have been a lot faster and smoother and cheaper and better. But that's the way of the world when you're sort of developing something brand new. And then outside,
Ophir, I have a comment on that. I have a comment on that, because we are in a very similar space actually.
Yeah.
So I would say I'm very happy that we were them at the beginning, because if we would know what we would have to go through, probably we would have given up.
Because there's benefits for being naive, 100%. Yeah. If you know how hard it's going to be and how challenging, then oftentimes you would do something.
And when you come to your first doctor and you say, "Look how great we are," and the doctor look at you, "Yeah, okay,
yeah, exactly."
Super. Not more than this, my friend.
Yeah, and that's the case with really building any business. I mean, it's really hard, especially in the field that we're in, Philippe. Right? So we're in the home run business. We're looking to build massive businesses and make a really fundamental impact on the world. And the alternative is not so pretty. So it's not always all or nothing. People hit singles, doubles, and triples, but really you're going for the home run. And that's a big swing. And we're also trying to do so in a relatively limited amount of time. And that time is defined really by capital and how much capital you have. And you have an investor class that, wants results relatively quickly. And that's just never going to be easy. That's why not everybody does it, and that's why a lot of them fail.
Can you tell us what's your biggest failure in Pearl business, and contrary, what's your biggest success in your company?
Look, I think we're incredibly well positioned. The business is growing, by hundreds of percent months over month. We're seeing a lot of adoption. We're seeing customers that are extremely happy, which is different when you first launch. I think customers are not always extremely happy with the quality of what they're seeing and the results, but this stuff really gets better over time and better with sort of customer and human real world interaction. And, that's really nice to see. So it's very stressful when you spend all this time and all this money building something and you put it out in market, and people, just like Philippe said earlier, are like, okay, and, versus seeing like the eyes widen and start sort of, profusely sort of going on and on about just how impactful it is to their business every day. There's really kind of a night and day difference with that different type of customer experience. So I think that we've achieved that bar of like creating really, really happy customers, which wasn't always the case, of course. And I think ask me in 2 years and we'll see. I think we're
Tell
on a
me
good.
tell me about your target groups. Means I know that you speak a lot with DSOs, but tell me about what is your value for dentists, for orthodontists, which I suppose by the essence of dental monitoring, we will have a larger audience through orthodontists. So if you can also provide
Yeah.
what is your value for orthodontists, and explain us
Yeah.
really what is the different target groups you have.
Well, there are a few different target groups. So we primarily focus on solving hard imaging problems in dentistry. And then there's a variety of ways to apply that. And we also take into account the PMS and all the data coming through that channel. And we correlate it all to create, value. From a radiographic perspective, what we're best known for today is like being the world's only turnkey solution for 2D radiographic review. So 2D is, bite wing, periapical, and OPG or PANS. And that's really what we're focused on deploying, at great velocity today into the world. We're also very heavily involved with generating similar and other advanced capabilities with CT. We're doing work with Ceph. We do work with intraoral scans.
So CT is available now.
CT is not available now by any company in the world, but it's very much under the same kind of R&D and regulatory clearance effort.
Okay.
So that'll probably be coming out next year.
Right. Because this is actually a very strong request on the ortho world.
It's a big request on the ortho world. I think it's also just amazing what you can do in that environment with CT. It's just like a world difference. And it's also challenging because there's so many slices in a CT, and the quantity of data that you're dealing with, as you guys know, is much more significant. So it's a different kind of challenge, but we're well on our way towards sort of solving that as well. So currently, I would say first and foremost, single practice locations or small groups or DSOs, we don't really differentiate. We have different teams and different relationships that focus on the different elements of the business globally, but we're really focused on getting this into every dental practice globally because we think that it just has a really positive impact on the ability to diagnose, but also the ability to communicate very clearly with patients and thereby, elevate the standard of care. We also work with dental labs in automated margin marking and identifying quality of preps. We also work with payers, although I should say our work with payers is really, we take a very provider first view. So we do things like adjudication and even fraud, waste, and abuse detection, but we always show our results to the provider first. We're very intentional about being very aligned with providers and servicing providers. And if they kind of check off on things, then we'll send it to the payer for the subsequent steps. And with ortho in particular, one thing we do that's pretty useful is we're able to look at entire patient populations and identify ortho candidates. Things like spacing and crowding and malocclusion and roof parallelism and all the different sort of ortho scenarios. So many patients, as you guys know, are ortho candidates to begin with. And it's just like a massive area of general opportunity, but we'll continue to do more work there with CT and Ceph over time also.
Refocus on 2D radiographs. Is there a pathology something that is more easily or constantly detected than compared to other pathologies? What your technology is about to detect the most consistently?
Yeah. You could look at the research data and see, but the truth is it's always sort of getting retrained and improving. So it's a moving target. It really is a function of what we're focusing on. Honestly, they're all pretty hard, I always say, because of the reason they're hard to detect by humans. It's the same reason it's hard for machines, right? It's a very similar kind of model. So if you think about calculus or periapical lesions or margin discrepancies or carries, like these are or bone levels or bone loss, we're talking about sometimes very subtle realities within a radiograph that determine whether or not that's kind of present. So just like in the real world, you have instances that are very pronounced and very obvious, and you have instances that are, very preliminary. It's important to us to be able to identify the instances that are also very early on. We want to identify early, enamel only, interproximal caries so that they can be treated preventatively and you don't have to drill, right? Similarly with calculus or bone loss, you want to maybe engage in some sort of perio protocol early on so that things don't advance to a worse level. So we need to identify things, obviously, that are extremely advanced, and also identify things early on. And oftentimes, just from a machine learning perspective, we're employing entirely different models for, very large decay versus interproximal decay. It's not really the same AI model that's identifying those two things. They're so dramatically different. So really, when you run an image through Pearl, we're running like 30 different models. Not this like one massive AI brain. It's like 30 little brains that are coming up with the results.
And do you plan to, or maybe it's an existing function, I don't know, to have comparison between for example, two pans taken at different times? For
Yeah.
the evolution, you told us about bone loss, for example. Can you imagine to have a comparison between a pan taken 4 or 5 years ago and a pan taken today, and tell what's the evolution?
Yeah, good question. So that is actively being done every day. So you're able to pull up two pans side by side, look at progression of different disease over time, and we actually measure bone levels explicitly. So you're able to look at the bone level comparisons as well. We have generated some generative models where we're able to actually show how things are going to continue to progress over time. Although I would say, at least in the US, and it's different for different countries, but that is a different kind of medical capability that does also require a certain kind of FDA clearance. So we're always having to, make sure that what we're doing is regulatorily allowed. So if we're going to start generating, 5 years into the future, that's something that we actually could do pretty well, but we're not able to put that out in all markets.
Just a quick question. I was a few weeks ago in a Stifel conference about AI, and it speaks to me a lot because we have actually all this question within DM in terms of usage of a massive quantity of GPUs, and we are one of the biggest clients of Amazon in France today. What is don't go too much in the technology part of it, but what is your feeling in terms of the sustainability of AI within dentistry? Because we are big users of GPU, and how do you feel that? How we can compensate that?
So the GPU thing with all forms of AI is really like a fundamental consideration, because if you want to do this kind of heavy lifting in real time, especially, you need to rely on high-powered GPUs, and that is not only very consumptive, it's also very expensive. I think that's something people don't understand, is like CPUs are cheap, GPUs are expensive.
Yeah, I think we pay like $4 an hour or something like this today.
Yeah, it's
crazy. It's crazy.
So I guess I have two thoughts on that. One is that the winds of change and momentum are on our side. So there's a huge amount of capital going into the optimization of GPUs. And you see like NVIDIA, for example, who's a huge provider of GPUs, just hit $1 trillion market cap. So there's a huge, there almost couldn't be any more money going into just the fundamental chip technology that makes this stuff ultimately more affordable to employ and faster and better, kind of like Moore's law. And the other thing is kind of energy uses. So energy, these are very consumptive from an energy perspective, and that's part of why the cost is so high. It's not just like the chip or the usage of the chip or the compute, it's the energy behind it. And I think there's a lot of breakthroughs in energy happening as well, and sustainable energy, in climate sort of friendly carbon neutral energy. Maybe we'll have, fusion in the next few years, at which point costs will drop.
It seems that we are working next to your office, Serge. There is the fusion reactor in construction,
There's a fusion
right?
reactor in the south of France. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so
And I use part of this energy.
that will become a reality. Hopefully, I mean, they've already kind of proven this out technically, but maybe in the next 10 years we have that. The other thing I would say is there's almost always a much more optimal way to do something. So our path, and I think most AI companies, you probably see this similar thing, is like we get a lot of demand, we just throw more and more compute at it, our costs get out of control, and then we do a bunch of refactoring and optimization, and we bring the costs way down again. And it's kind of that just happens over and over again over time.
A big trick that we did recently is we are cutting our models. We are making our models smaller and smaller and smaller, and we discretize really our model. That we don't we try to reduce the impact on that because it's a very big topic. It's not really a question of money. It's especially in Europe and strongly coming in US, the energy feeling of people of using energy to do anything is now a problematic that companies cannot avoid. And so we are working very strongly on reducing the size of the model, and keeping the quality, of course. And
then there's also those optimizations like, Kubernetes. I mean, what's nice about what's happening in the field is that so much of the developments are open source. And therefore, a lot of the advancements that like a Facebook or a Google or historically an OpenAI, although now that's kind of changing, come up with becomes available to the general community and could be employed.
Early on, at DM, we had lots of fear from the market about AI. Like, oh, come on, you are going to replace us and blah, 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 and all this speech. How do you feel that the customer perception, the doctor perception is changing on that matter? And actually, I would like also Serge to answer into that, because maybe you were thinking like this at the beginning, and I would like both of you to answer to this question, which is, what is your feeling about that in terms of, is it still true that AI is perceived as a threat to dentists? Let's say, keep it to dentists.
So we see it come in two forms. And I should say this is generally like the outlier case, not the norm. But one point of feedback will be, I'm perfect at reading radiography. I don't need this. I don't get anything wrong. I don't miss anything. And our response to that is not to fight with practitioners, but I will say that in those cases, if you do look at the actual performance over time, like they are missing lots of things. If you look at it historically. So that's just generally not true. But I think the other half of the value proposition here, if you take the diagnostic component out, is patient communication. So being able to show patients a visual of like, here's decay, here's how much it's encroached into the dentin, here's how close it is to the root, like versus, and showing them that in a color-coded manner with all the detections overlaid, versus just trying to explain that if they don't do something quickly, they're going to need a root canal, like is night and day for the patient. And that's why there's such an increase in case acceptance. So just from that perspective alone, if you're wanting to serve your patients and if you're wanting to also like sort of drive necessary production, this is a very useful tool to have. On the other side of the fence is the fear, like you mentioned, of, oh no, is this going to replace me? Or this is just threatening to me in some other way. And I was actually at a conference a few weeks ago. I was talking to a doctor. He was like amazed by the technology, wasn't very familiar with it. And he's like, I know that I'm probably going to implement this in my practice in the next like year, but I'm going to hold off. Like, I just feel like concerned about it. And I want to be the most important thing in the practice, not the AI, like it was this kind of feeling about it. I always kind of chuckled because the reality of all this stuff, whether you're talking about dentistry or any other form of radiography or lots of other applications, is like, this is an inevitability. It's so powerful at elevating the standard of care, at surfacing, 37% more disease on average, which is very significant, that it is just going to make its way into every practice and become an effective utility, just like power or water or basic tools. Like, it's not a question. I'm very clear on that. I've always been very clear on that. So just like any other sort of adoption curve, you have early adopters and you have the kind of middle area, then you have the late adopters. And I think this is going to kind of follow that model. So if folks don't feel ready, we try to educate them about the benefits and also the benefits versus the cost, which is, fairly affordable relative, especially to the value that it generates. And if they're not ready, then they're not ready. That's okay.
And I think there is really there is a question of knowing and understanding. I think there is a lot of myth behind AI, and they really need to understand. It's not that complex.
Can I answer? Can I have my answer too?
Okay, Serge, please. The doctor is giving us opinion of.
You can thank Hollywood for that, because Hollywood is all like robots and Terminators. Like, people don't know that about AI, and it's obviously the reality is very different and very narrow. But let's hear what Serge has to say.
I think the key word is consistency, because from a medical perspective, we are just humans and we are not consistent. I don't have the same look on the radiographs when I have 2 minutes between patients and I have to see everything in a hurry, or when I have the time and I'm rested, I'm relaxed, and I can spend 10 minutes looking at the radiographs. And this is, for me, I think the main importance of the computers is they are consistent. And first of all, I cannot be consistent, and I cannot look at everything every time. I'm not perfect. And for me, it's the most important part, I think. I see the computers and the AI as a way to try to facilitate my life and my diagnosis. And as Ophir said in the beginning of this interview, it's at the end, we will take the decision of doing something or not. It's not the computers that will decide for us what to do. And we will have the efficiency, and we will have the manual qualities to treat the patient according to our diagnosis. So the IA just help us to have a better and more consistent diagnosis. And as you mentioned it's a very effective way to communicate with patients, because it's always very hard to show a patient a radiograph and try to explain him what we see and where we see it. Just you see here is a gray area. It means that you have a problem there. And look, if you take the radiograph that we had in another angle, you can see it's not there. So it means it's very hard to explain the patient without images and without colors and without boxes, for example, and areas. And with this solution, I think it's more visual and it's more helpful for us to be consistent and explain to the patient what we need to do. But at the end, it will be the doctor that will decide what is the treatment plan.
Yeah, so I think you represented that beautifully, and I think consistency is like the name of the game. I guess the question I would ask you is, if Philippe or I encounter a practitioner who just has concerns, and we've done our best to educate them, but they have these concerns around being replaced or whatever else might be the case, like, how would you approach that?
I think it's inevitable to use computers and to use AI. As you say, there are early adopters, there are late adopters, but there will be adopters, and they will have to come to that. And for me, when I try to explain the interest of AI in the field of medical, I take, for example, the breast cancer. You see, when you make radiographs, years ago it was interpreted by only radiograph practitioners, okay, but radiologists, and then they had an AI, and they showed people that they will see lesions and cancer 2 or 3 years before any radiologist can see that happening. So if it's a concern of medical interest and general medical interest, so if the computer help us to be more efficient, and as you mentioned it, the 37%, I think you said, of increasing the detection of decays and problems, it's very important for Gen Pops and to just see problems before they happen or sooner and treat them with a lighter treatment. And it's a way of global health. It's a way to improve global health, I think.
Great.
Agreed.
So what is your product roadmap? When are you coming to Europe? And
We're in Europe. We actually just announced a partnership also with Dental Directory, the largest distributor, in the UK. We're operating in Italy and Germany. We're seeing, lots of pickup and adoption. France is also high on our list, FYI. But we have lots of different distribution relationships, partnerships with the largest imaging platforms. We just announced a partnership with Planmeca, where they're embedding our AI directly into their native interface. You're going to see a lot more of those types of partnerships be announced as well. So doctors are just going to naturally find this option available to them without having to do any other software install or interact with any other imaging system. It's really just like what they have today will be AI enabled, and that's going to be a fundamental mode of distribution. We're doing a lot of work in the UAE. We're doing lots of work in Australia, South America. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to do because it's a big world out there. But that's why I kind of said, like, ask us in 2 years in terms of our failures and successes.
So, Ophir, I'm very happy that
Really
we're bringing some brand awareness to Pearl AI on the European market.
Some people say, I see you everywhere. Your advertising is so great. Some people say, I've never heard of this. What the hell are you talking about?
It's because the dentistry world is very big.
The dentistry world,
everybody will know about it, right?
Yeah,
of course they will. But look,
I have just one question. I think we missed one important question today. Is what makes you so unique in the market? Do you have any competitors? Because I won't say it's the first time I heard about AI in radiology, but do you have any major competitors, maybe local or global ones? I don't know. I'm not aware of. And what makes you special compared to them?
They are. I can say they are. So
I think the key difference for us is no other company could come even close to sort of saying this, which is that we are a truly turnkey global solution. Meaning, if you look at it from a capabilities perspective and being comprehensive from that perspective, regulatory clearances, distributed architecture, things like GDPR compliance, like we could turn this capability on anywhere, like very, very quickly with any partner. And that's also why, partners like Planmeca like us so much, because we can just service them globally in a very turnkey manner. There are other companies that are doing AI in dentistry. There's 2 other companies in the US that are FDA cleared, albeit they have like 2 conditions cleared. We have many more. And there are also some regional players throughout Europe that are kind of doing some work. But the reality is that to do this properly just costs a lot of money in terms of obviously just capital, but also expertise and time. And we have invested the time, the money, and the sweat into doing this right. And I don't think that there are massively serious competitors. In other words, I've seen some companies that I think are doing some interesting work, and it's kind of impressive, but like they just can't do it in very many places. And I think that to get from where they are today to where we currently are is just going to take a lot of time. So, it's a rapidly evolving space. AI is a very hot topic. We have seen some players in Europe that have been kind of interesting. Like there was a company, I believe, called Dental X-Ray, And what you see is the smaller players, I think, come into the space, and they call us too because they want to get acquired by us, and they're just like, we're not going to be able to catch up in time. And I think that that's really the sense that a lot of folks have, and I think it'd be very difficult even for a large company to catch up now, just because getting the regulatory clearances, getting MDR, getting FDA, building this out is so consuming, and then you have to actually make it good, and you can only make it good by being in market. And it's just like, it needs to be battle tested and improved for a long period of time. So, we would like to continue to solve really hard problems in the space and be a very R&D oriented company and get these capabilities out to practitioners via all the relevant channels. But we'll see how it evolves. I mean, there's definitely, a lot of activity in AI in general and also in dentistry. Yeah.
Ophir, my last question, Serge, do you have a last question on your side before?
No, done.
So my last question to you, let's forget Pearl, let's forget AI, okay? We put on the side. What is for you the incoming breaking through technology, the new things that are coming outside our world? Because we could say AI and what we do then to monitoring or Pearl. Within dentistry, of course. What do you feel would be big changes outside what we do in the coming years in dentistry in general?
In relation to AI?
Not in relation to AI.
I'm going to say one thing about AI, which is not about Pearl or dental monitoring, but I think is going to have a pretty profound impact. And that's all the news and all the excitement and all the craziness around LLMs, the large language models, and ChatGPT and just generative AI in general, I think is going to have a really interesting impact on the world. It already is starting to.
Who is not using them already?
Yeah, exactly. So just from everything as sort of rote and basic to sort of doctor's notes to, article generation to research support, to actually being able to interface with maybe a virtual expert to ask lots of questions, even so other dentists can do that. These are all developments that are going to be brought forth by virtue of large language models, and I think are going to have a really meaningful impact, both large and small.
I'm seeing that recently. I've seen it, this ChatGPT integration in Grammarly, which is great. Like it's composing my emails in seconds. I have to do nothing, not even to go to another website. It's like, wow, I'm just impressed. But outside AI, I'm insisting on this question because look, I'm speaking about AI all day long, and I would like to be open-minded and see that there is not only AI. Do you see anything else in dentistry which is striking you?
So look, I mean, I also focus on what we do, and I'm probably not the best person to ask because I'm actually not even from the dental category. Like I've become very familiar with it, but I'm relatively new. Obviously, we're seeing lots of changes in modalities and advancements and on the hardware side of things. And I think teledentistry is going to be a very interesting area that increasingly is going to actually find its footing and find its legs. So if you look at America, for example, the majority of Americans never go to the dentist. There's a lot of fear. A lot of folks don't have insurance. Unlike in Europe, in many places, we don't have socialized healthcare. So if you have the ability to kind of democratize dentistry and provide access into that environment in a more meaningful way, I think that's a very big and interesting and important opportunity. That sounds like something that dental monitoring could kind of have a hand in as well. And look at the history of dentistry is one of, there's a certain norm and a way in which things operate, and then a new technology comes around and it kind of changes everything, whether that's the high-speed drill or amalgams or implants or digital dentistry or AI or teledentistry. Like it's going to keep happening with increasing velocity. And I think that, the standard of care and the access to care is only going to get better and be enhanced and also become more affordable. And that's a good thing. I don't know, exactly what the next 20 years will look like, but I think the velocity of those changes is going to be more significant than anything that we've seen historically, just because the pace of change is now faster than it was. So that's my answer.
But we will definitely be part of the next 20 years. for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for listening the Dental Monitoring Ortho Forward podcast, and thank you Serge for coming tonight and co-hosting this
Philippe.
great interview, and Ophir,
Bye.
again, thank you for coming, and see you next time.